The shame enveloped the space. "Do you still not understand your place, Janet?" Gerald Hayes, the operations manager, sneered with a voice full of disdain. "You're nothing but a janitor, nothing at all. Clean this floor again until I can see my reflection clearly in it or never come back here again." "Sir, I've cleaned it many times already," Mary Williams replied calmly, her voice still steady despite the cruel insult. Without saying another word, Gerald grabbed a cup full of cold water and deliberately poured it straight onto Mary's head. The cold water poured down her hair, streaming over her face, soaking her uniform and collecting at her feet on the newly cleaned, shiny floor. The sudden cold made her flinch, but what truly stunned her was the deliberate cruelty of the act. "Now you have something real to clean," Gerald mocked, turning away with a sense of triumph. But he couldn't have known that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't just a frail janitor, but the very woman who had built this company from scratch, a woman with enough power, determination, and resolve to bring his entire career crashing down in an instant. At the top floor of a skyscraper in bustling New York City, Williams Innovations stood tall and imposing, its iconic logo illuminating the night skyline. Behind this empire was an extraordinary woman named Mary Williams, known throughout the industry simply as the Legend. Mary's journey began 35 years ago in a time when society still harbored deep biases against black women in business. At 25, armed with nothing but determination and a revolutionary vision for financial technology, she rented a tiny office in the suburbs with capital scraped together from friends who believed in her dream. Those early years tested her resolve daily. Nights spent sleeping on her office desk because she couldn't afford an apartment, rejection after rejection from investors who couldn't see past her gender and race, and countless moments when giving up seemed the only rational choice. "You'll never succeed in finance," they told her. "Know your place." Words that echoed those Gerald had just spat at her decades later. But Mary had transformed those wounds into wisdom, building Williams Innovations into a financial technology giant worth billions, employing thousands worldwide, and revolutionizing how people access financial services. The company hadn't just been successful, it had been revolutionary in its culture. Mary had built Williams Innovations on three unshakable pillars: equality, creativity, and respect for everyone regardless of position. She'd created the kind of workplace she wished had existed when she started her career. One where janitors were treated with the same dignity as executives, where innovation could come from anywhere, and where kindness wasn't seen as weakness but as strength. 5 years ago, feeling the weight of decades of leadership, Mary had carefully handed the reins to her only son, Robert Williams. Harvard-educated and mentored personally by Mary since childhood, Robert understood the company's values, or so she had believed. She had trained him not just in business strategy, but in compassion, teaching him that true leadership meant serving others rather than wielding power over them. The first signs of trouble came subtly. A loyal executive who'd been with Mary since the beginning called her one evening, voice hesitant. "Things are different now, Mary. The atmosphere has changed." Then came other whispers, reports of arrogance from senior managers, mistreatment of lower-level staff, subtle discrimination creeping back into hiring practices. The company culture she had nurtured like a precious garden was withering under new leadership. Mary tried to dismiss these concerns at first. Change was natural with new leadership, she told herself. Robert needed space to establish his own style. But as weeks passed, the reports grew more troubling. Employees who had been with the company for decades were quietly resigning. The warm, collaborative atmosphere was being replaced by fear and competition. "What's happening to my company?" Mary wondered, staring at a recent photo of Robert surrounded by his new executive team. Faces she barely recognized, eyes hard with ambition rather than vision. Unable to ignore her growing unease, Mary made a decision that surprised even herself. If she wanted to know the truth about what was happening inside Williams Innovations, she needed to see it with her own eyes, not as Mary Williams, founder and legend, but as someone invisible to power. "I'll become a janitor," she whispered to herself one night, the plan taking shape in her mind. At 60, With her silver hair and the subtle lines that marked her face, she could easily pass as an elderly cleaning woman. Someone the executives would look past without a second glance. Someone whose presence would never threaten their sense of importance. The next morning, Mary created a new identity. Janet, an elderly woman desperate for work to supplement her meager retirement. She arranged for her employment through a third-party cleaning service that contracted with Williams Innovations, ensuring no connection to her real identity. She practiced walking differently, speaking softly, keeping her eyes down, all the invisible behaviors of those society has trained itself not to see. As she donned the gray uniform for the first time, looking at her transformed reflection in the mirror, Mary felt a strange mix of determination and sadness. "I built this company from nothing," she whispered to her reflection. "I'll do whatever it takes to save its soul." What Mary couldn't have anticipated was just how painful this journey would be. How deeply it would cut to be invisible in the very hall she had designed, to be treated as less than human in the company that bore her name. Nor could she have predicted the shocking conspiracy she would uncover, one that threatened not just the company's values, but its very existence. Mary's first shift began at 10 p.m. The janitorial team manager, a middle-aged man with perpetually furrowed brows, gave her a cursory introduction that lasted all of 3 minutes before thrusting a cleaning cart into her hands and walking away. "Don't break anything expensive," were his parting words, not even bothering to show her where supplies were kept or which areas needed special attention. Standing alone in the long, empty hallway, Mary glanced down at the plastic name tag pinned to her uniform. Janet. The name felt foreign, like a mask she wasn't sure how to wear. The building that had once been her second home now felt alien and intimidating from this new perspective. The gleaming marble floors she had once proudly walked across as CEO now stretched before her as endless surfaces to be scrubbed. The sound of purposeful footsteps echoing down the corridor broke her reverie. Mary instinctively lowered her gaze, a habit she'd observed in the cleaning staff during her years as CEO, though she'd never fully understood the significance of that gesture until now. Gerald Hayes, the operations manager, approached with the confident stride of a man who believed in his own importance. Tall, with slick-back light brown hair and an impeccably tailored suit, he carried himself with the kind of authority that demanded attention. Mary had heard his name in board meetings, but had never met him personally. Robert had hired him after she stepped down. Gerald stopped directly in front of her, his expensive leather shoes entering her downcast field of vision. He made a show of looking her up and down, his lips curling slightly. "New here, are you?" His voice carried the artificial politeness that barely masked contempt. "We don't pay for slow old people. Work faster. I don't want to see a speck of dust around here." Mary kept her voice steady, fighting against the instinct to stand tall and meet his gaze as an equal. "Yes, sir. I'll be careful." Gerald's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile if it contained any warmth. Without another word, he deliberately stepped onto the section of floor she had just mopped, leaving muddy footprints in his wake. The message was clear: your work means nothing. As he walked away, Mary stared at the dirty marks on her freshly cleaned floor. In 35 years of business, she had faced discrimination, sexism, and countless attempts to undermine her authority. But this casual cruelty was something different. This wasn't about business competition. It was about power wielded simply because it could be. With a quiet sigh, she began cleaning the floor again. Later that night, Mary encountered Derek Phillips, the young marketing director whose stylish appearance and trendy vocabulary had made him a favorite for business magazine profiles. He had just finished a late meeting and found Mary cleaning near his office. "Clean faster," he snapped, not even looking at her directly. "I don't want to see you lingering by my office door. Do you know how important our work is?" Before Mary could respond, Derek walked into his office and slammed the door shut. The abrupt sound echoed through the empty hallway, making Mary flinch despite herself. As the night progressed, Mary began to notice patterns in how the janitorial staff operated, always with heads down, working hurriedly, trying to remain invisible. They spoke in whispers when they communicated at all, and they tensed visibly whenever executives approached. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about fear. During her break, Mary sat alone in the small janitor's break room, a stark contrast to the luxurious executive lounge she had designed 20 floors above. The room was cramped, with mismatched chairs and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. On the wall hung a company poster about valuing every team member that seemed like a cruel joke given what she had witnessed. A young woman entered, her uniform identical to Mary's. She startled slightly upon seeing someone else in the room. "Sorry," she murmured, turning to leave. "Please, don't go," Mary said gently. "I'm Janet. It's my first night." The woman hesitated, then offered a tentative smile. "Maria, I work the East Wing." Her accent suggested Latin American origins. "Is it always like this?" Mary asked carefully. Maria's eyes darted to the door before she answered. "Like what?" "The way they speak to us. The managers." Maria shrugged, but the gesture couldn't hide the resignation in her eyes. "Some are worse than others. Mr. Hayes and Mr. Phillips, they like to show their power. Best to stay invisible." She checked her watch. "Break's almost over. Don't let them catch you resting too long." On Thursday evening, Mary witnessed an interaction that made her blood run cold. While cleaning the elevator area on the 42nd floor, she saw Maria accidentally drop a small bottle of glass cleaner. The liquid splattered onto Gerald Hayes' shoes as he was waiting for the elevator. His reaction was immediate and explosive. "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the corridor. "Do you think you'll ever be able to pay for them with a lifetime of cleaning?" Maria, terrified, repeatedly apologized, her head bowed, so low her chin nearly touched her chest. But Gerald wasn't appeased. "People like you need to know your place," he hissed, stepping closer to Maria, who seemed to shrink before him. "If this happens again, don't even think about coming back here." He stormed off, leaving Maria standing motionless, tears welling in her eyes. Mary rushed over, gently touching the young woman's shoulder. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Maria quickly wiped her tears and nodded, already reaching for her cleaning supplies. "It's nothing. I need to finish my work." "That wasn't nothing," Mary insisted. "He shouldn't speak to anyone that way." Maria gave Mary a look that contained both warning and pity. "Please, Janet, don't make trouble. We need these jobs." She glanced around nervously. "The cameras, they're always watching. Just be careful." As Maria hurried away, Mary stood frozen, a deep anger building inside her. This wasn't just about rudeness or poor management. This was systematic dehumanization in the very company she had built to be different. That night, Mary also observed how Derek Phillips operated. Unlike Gerald's explosive anger, Derek's cruelty was cold and calculated. He would intentionally scatter papers and spill drinks on his desk, then make Mary clean it repeatedly until he declared himself satisfied, which he never truly was. Once, while Mary was collecting trash in Derek's office, he sat watching her coldly. "Why do we still hire useless old people like you?" he mused, as if she weren't even present. "A robot vacuum could do a better job." Mary kept her head down, not responding, but the words cut deeply. What hurt most wasn't the personal insult, but the realization that Derek felt no remorse for his cruelty. In his world, people like Janet didn't deserve basic human dignity. As Mary continued her work that night, she noticed a younger executive, Emily Chun from the finance department, approach. Unlike the others, Emily acknowledged Mary with a small smile and a good evening. When she accidentally knocked over a stack of papers, she immediately bent to help gather them. "I'm so sorry about that," Emily said, meeting Mary's eyes directly. "Thank you for all you do to keep this place running." The simple acknowledgement of her humanity felt like a cool drink after days in the desert. It also confirmed what Mary had begun to suspect. The toxicity wasn't universal. There were still good people at Williams Innovations, people who embodied the values she had worked to instill. But they were increasingly marginalized in a culture that rewarded cruelty and dominance. As Mary finished her shift and changed out of her uniform in the small employee locker room, she caught her reflection in the scratched mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes carrying a weight they hadn't before. She had come seeking answers about her company, but what she was finding was forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about the legacy she had built. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, determination hardening in her chest. She would continue this painful journey, no matter where it led. For the sake of Maria, for the countless invisible workers who had no voice, and for the soul of Williams Innovations itself. The days that followed passed with excruciating slowness. Each minute Mary spent as Janet revealed new layers of the toxic culture that had infected Williams Innovations like a silent disease. What had begun as an investigation into troubling rumors had become an immersion into a world of systematic humiliation and fear. A world she could never have imagined existing within the walls of her own creation. Gerald Hayes, she discovered, wasn't content with occasional displays of dominance. His cruelty had a methodical quality, as if breaking the spirit of those beneath him was not just a pastime, but a carefully cultivated skill. He seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting Mary, perhaps sensing something in her that refused to be completely cowed. One Wednesday evening, as Mary finished cleaning the hallway on the 38th floor, Gerald appeared suddenly from behind. The hallway lights cast harsh shadows across his face, giving him an almost predatory appearance. "Are you done, Janet?" His voice carried the chill of carefully controlled contempt. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," Mary replied evenly. "Everything has been cleaned according to procedure." Gerald's eyes narrowed as he scanned the hallway. Without warning, he pulled a small white cloth from his jacket pocket and bent down to wipe a corner of the wall Mary had just meticulously cleaned. Rising slowly, he held the spotless cloth up like evidence in a trial. "Is this what you call clean, Janet?" His voice dripped with mock disappointment. "I thought by your age, you should know what clean looks like." Mary looked at the cloth. There wasn't a trace of dirt on it, not even a smudge. Yet Gerald's expression suggested he'd found damning proof of her incompetence. With deliberate slowness, he dropped the cloth onto the freshly mopped floor. "Clean this entire hallway again," he ordered. "And remember, if you want to keep your job, I don't want to see a single mistake, no matter how small." Mary silently picked up the cloth, her face betraying nothing as Gerald walked away with a satisfied chuckle. Alone in the silent hallway, Mary allowed herself a moment of pure, unfiltered rage. She gripped the cleaning cart handle so tightly her knuckles whitened, fighting the urge to scream or throw something or march straight to Robert's office and end the charade. Instead, she took 3 deep breaths, the same technique she'd used during the most stressful negotiations of her career, and began cleaning again. "This isn't about me," she whispered to herself. "This is about something much bigger." A few days later, Mary was cleaning the windows in the large conference room when Gerald appeared again, this time with a freshly brewed cup of coffee. He stood beside her, gazing out at the city skyline. "Janet, do you know why people like you will always just be janitors?" he asked conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Mary paused her work and turned to face him. "No, sir." Gerald took a slow sip of his coffee. "Because people like you always accept mediocrity. You have no ambition, no capability, and no self-respect. You only do what's necessary, never excellent." As he spoke, he tilted his coffee cup slightly, allowing dark drops to fall onto the freshly cleaned floor. Each drop felt like a deliberate wound, a statement of power that said, "I can destroy your work simply because I wish to." "Clean it up, Janet," he said, placing his cup on the table. "I want this place to be so clean I can see my reflection in it." Mary silently cleaned the coffee spill, aware that Gerald was watching her with that same satisfied expression. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity that this wasn't just about cleanliness or standards. This was about power. Gerald needed to demonstrate his complete control, to affirm his superiority over those he deemed beneath him. What Gerald couldn't know was that with each humiliation, each demonstration of petty power, Mary's resolve was hardening like steel in a forge. Every drop of coffee, every needless criticism, Every cold smile was fueling a determination that would eventually become his undoing. In the employee break room during her short lunch period, Mary found Maria sitting alone, staring blankly at an untouched sandwich. "May I join you?" Mary asked softly. Maria nodded, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How long have you worked here?" Mary asked as she sat down. 3 years, Maria replied. "I came from Guatemala. This job, it pays for my mother's medicine back home." Mary nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that kept so many trapped in situations they would otherwise flee. "Has it always been like this? The way they treat us?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "It used to be different. When Ms. Williams was in charge, the founder, things were better. There's respect, you know, even for us." She sighed. "But after she left, everything changed. Slowly at first, then like this." The words sent a pang through Mary's heart. She had built something good, something that mattered, and then watched from a distance as it crumbled. "What happened?" she asked, careful to maintain her role. Maria shrugged. "New management, new values. Money became everything. And people like us, we became nothing." She checked her watch and stood quickly. "Break's over. Mr. Hayes checks the cameras to make sure we don't take extra minutes." As Maria hurried away, Mary sat alone, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just a failure of management. It was her failure, too. She had chosen her successor, trusted the company to continue without her vigilance, believed that the values she had instilled were strong enough to endure. She had been wrong. That weekend, after a particularly grueling shift, Mary made a decision. She needed to understand if there were any systems still in place to protect employees. If the company's HR department, once a model of employee advocacy, still functioned as she had designed it. On Monday afternoon, Mary gathered her courage and walked into the Human Resources office on the 20th floor. The office was tastefully arranged, with motivational posters and plants creating an atmosphere of warmth and approachability. It was exactly as Mary had designed it years ago, a safe harbor for employees facing difficulties. Karen Mitchell, the HR director, sat behind a large desk, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her sharp features partially hidden behind stylish glasses. She had been with the company for nearly 20 years, rising through the ranks under Mary's mentorship. Once she had been passionate about employee welfare, fighting tirelessly for better conditions and fair treatment. When Mary entered, Karen barely glanced up from her computer screen. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice professionally neutral but distinctly cold. "I'm here to report some serious issues that I and several other janitorial staff have been experiencing," Mary replied, careful to maintain her role as Janet. Karen looked up more fully, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "You're Janet, the night shift janitor, right?" she asked, emphasizing janitor as if it were a diagnosis rather than a job title. Mary nodded. "Yes, I'm Janet. I would like to report the mistreatment and humiliation that I and my colleagues have been subjected to by some of the senior management." Karen observed Mary silently for a moment, then crossed her arms and sighed. "All right, Janet, keep it brief. I have many important things to do." The dismissiveness in her tone was unmistakable. This wasn't the Karen that Mary had known, the passionate advocate who had once stayed late to help a cafeteria worker file a complaint against a vice president who had spoken to her inappropriately. Specifically, Gerald Hayes and Derek Phillips. Mary continued, undeterred. "They continually make unreasonable demands, forcing us to redo tasks repeatedly, deliberately creating situations to publicly humiliate us." Karen raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "Are you sure you're not overreacting, Janet? In the workplace, sometimes leaders need to be strict to ensure quality. This isn't anything new." "I understand that," Mary replied, maintaining her composure despite the growing disappointment in her chest. "But their actions go beyond strictness. Gerald publicly poured cold water on my head. Derek intentionally creates messes to make me redo tasks multiple times. That's not strictness, that's bullying." Karen glanced at her watch impatiently. "I understand how you feel, Janet, but you need to look at things realistically. This is a competitive business environment, and sometimes small hurts are inevitable. If you're feeling upset, I suggest you adapt instead of being overly sensitive." Mary stood in stunned silence. The words were so far removed from the company policies she had personally written, policies that explicitly protected all employees from harassment and guaranteed their right to dignity in the workplace. "Doesn't the HR department have any policies in place to protect employees like us?" she asked, giving Karen one last chance to be the person Mary had once believed her to be. Karen's expression hardened. "We are, of course, always ready to protect employees. But you need to understand your position and role. If everyone came here to complain about small issues, this company would never grow." Her voice grew colder. "You're a janitor. Your job is to do your tasks well, not to come up here and complain about the harshness of work." The words hung in the air between them, a final confirmation of how completely the company's values had been corrupted. Karen, once a champion for the vulnerable, had become part of the machinery of oppression. "Janet," Karen added with finality, "remember that this company hired you to clean, not to evaluate or comment on management methods. I hope you won't waste any more of our time." Mary left the HR office with a heavy heart, but also with clarity. The system she had built to protect employees had been corrupted from within. There would be no help from official channels. The very people meant to protect were now complicit in the abuse. As she walked toward the elevator, Mary passed a large portrait of herself that hung in the main hallway. Mary Williams, founder and visionary. The woman in the portrait looked confident, powerful, unassailable. How strange that she now stood before it as Janet, invisible and powerless in the eyes of those around her. But not truly powerless, Mary reminded herself. Never that. She had built Williams Innovations from nothing once before. If necessary, she would tear down what it had become and rebuild it again, this time with safeguards that couldn't be so easily corrupted. As the elevator doors closed, Mary made a silent promise to herself and to every employee who had suffered under this new regime of cruelty. This ends now. A few days after the crushing disappointment with Karen, Mary continued her work with renewed purpose. The feeling of isolation weighed heavily on her, but it had also crystallized her resolve. If the system she had created to protect employees had failed so completely, she would need irrefutable evidence to force change. That evening, Mary was assigned to clean the large conference room on the 44th floor, the executive meeting room where the senior leadership held their end-of-day gatherings. As she methodically worked through her cleaning routine, the door suddenly swung open. Veronica Wells, the vice president of business development, swept in with an entourage of junior employees trailing behind her, all carrying stacks of documents. In her mid-40s, Veronica projected an aura of absolute authority with her tailored suit and sharp, calculating gaze. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted Mary still cleaning. "Janet, why are you still here at this hour?" Her voice carried the chill of thinly veiled hostility. Mary responded with practiced deference. "Sorry, Mrs. Wells. I'm just following the pre-scheduled cleaning routine. I'll be done in just a few minutes." Veronica's expression hardened. "What do you think you're doing, bothering us while we're preparing for such an important meeting? Who gave you permission to interfere with leadership's work?" "I truly apologize for any inconvenience," Mary explained calmly. "But this is the procedure set by the operations department. I'm just doing my job." A heavy silence fell over the room. The junior employees all lowered their eyes, suddenly fascinated by the papers in their hands or the pattern of the carpet. None dared to look at Mary directly. "Are you daring to argue with me, Janet?" Veronica's voice dropped dangerously low. "Have you forgotten your place?" Before Mary could respond, Veronica closed the distance between them in 3 quick strides. The sharp click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like a countdown. Without warning, she raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap across Mary's face. The force of the blow made Mary stagger backward, her cleaning supplies clattering to the floor. The burning pain spread across her cheek, but far worse than the physical sting was the crushing humiliation of being struck like a disobedient child in front of a room full of silent witnesses. You need to remember who you are and what position you hold in this company, Veronica said, her voice arctic with contempt. If you ever dare to defy me again, I'll make sure you regret it. Not a single person in the room moved to intervene. The junior employees remained frozen, their eyes averted, as if Mary had become invisible, or perhaps as if they feared being the next target of Veronica's wrath. As Veronica and her team took their seats at the conference table, deliberately ignoring her presence, Mary quietly gathered her fallen supplies. She could feel tears threatening to fall, but refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. With as much dignity as she could muster, she left the room, closing the doors softly behind her. In the empty hallway, Mary leaned against the wall, her hand gently touching her cheek where the imprint of Veronica's hand still burned. In 35 years of business, through brutal negotiations and cutthroat competition, no one had ever dared to lay a hand on her. The physical violation crossed a line that Mary hadn't even considered possible. But in that moment of pain and humiliation, something crystallized within her. This wasn't just about poor management or a toxic culture anymore. This was about basic human dignity being stripped away, not just from her, but from every vulnerable employee in the company. "This ends now," she whispered to herself, a quiet promise that carried the weight of absolute certainty. That night, Mary made a crucial decision. She would need more than just her word against theirs. She needed undeniable evidence. The next day, she carefully purchased small recording devices and miniature cameras, discreetly attaching them to her cleaning cart and uniform. If the executives were going to reveal their true nature, she would ensure it was captured for all to see. For the next several nights, Mary continued her role as Janet flawlessly, but now with a new purpose. Each interaction, each cruel word, each demonstration of power was being meticulously documented. She moved through the building like a ghost, observing, recording, gathering the evidence that would eventually bring the entire corrupt system crashing down. One late night, while cleaning the executive floor, Mary noticed a sliver of light coming from beneath the door of a small meeting room at the end of the 42nd floor corridor. The hour was unusual for a meeting, nearly midnight, and something about the secretive nature of it triggered her instincts. Quietly approaching, Mary positioned herself near the door, activating her recording device. Through the thin walls, she could make out familiar voices: Gerald Hayes, Derek Phillips, Veronica Wells, and Karen Mitchell. The four most powerful people who had made her life as Janet a living hell were meeting in secret, long after most employees had gone home. "We no longer have time to hesitate." Gerald's voice came through clearly, tense and urgent. "Robert is starting to ask questions about the budget discrepancies. If we don't act soon, the whole plan will fall apart." Mary's heart began to race. This wasn't just about workplace culture. There was something deeper happening. "Robert is too weak to lead this company," Veronica's confident voice responded. "We need a stronger leader, someone who can take the company in the right direction, the direction that benefits us." "I've prepared all the internal documents and financial information," Karen added, her voice calculating and cold, so different from the passionate HR advocate Mary had once known. "Just a few more steps, and all the evidence will show that Robert is incapable of leading. At that point, the board will have no choice but to fire him." "Let's finish this plan quickly," Derek interjected with his characteristic impatience. "We need to move more budget into the subsidiary companies we control before everything gets exposed." Mary stood frozen outside the door, her blood turning to ice with each word. These four people, whom she and Robert had trusted with positions of power, weren't just bullies. They were conspirators plotting to overthrow her son and seize control of Williams' innovations for themselves. "When Robert steps down, I'll take over as CEO," Gerald continued, his voice filled with smug certainty. "The senior positions will go to you three. At that point, we'll have full control over Williams' innovations, and no one will be able to stop us." Derek's cold laugh echoed through the door. "Then we'll easily partner with competitors to rake in more profits. Remember, money is what matters most, not the flowery ideals about ethics that Mary and Robert have always preached." Mary remained perfectly still, barely breathing, ensuring that every word was being captured by her recording devices. The conspiracy was far more extensive and dangerous than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about mistreating employees. These four were planning to systematically dismantle everything she had built, everything she had entrusted to her son. As the meeting concluded and the conspirators began to leave, Mary quickly retreated to a supply closet, her heart pounding. She waited until she was certain they had all departed before emerging, her steps slightly unsteady from the shock of what she had just discovered. That night, in the safety of her apartment, Mary reviewed the evidence she had gathered. The video clips and audio recordings painted a damning picture of not just cruelty and indifference, but of a calculated conspiracy to destroy the company from within. Mary sat in silence, her mind racing with the implications. This was no longer just about restoring the company's culture. It was about saving Williams Innovations itself from those who would pervert its purpose for personal gain. She thought of Maria and the other employees who depended on their jobs, who suffered daily under the cruel regime these four had created. She thought of Robert, her son, being systematically undermined by people he trusted. And she thought of her own legacy, the company she had built from nothing, that had once stood as a beacon of what business could be when guided by principles beyond mere profit. In that moment of clarity, Mary knew exactly what she needed to do. The time for observing was over. Now was the time for action. With trembling fingers, not from fear, but from determination, Mary reached for her phone. It was time to contact Robert. Together, they would expose the conspiracy and reclaim Williams Innovations from those who sought to destroy it. As she dialed her son's number, Mary felt a strange calm settle over her. The path ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but she was Mary Williams, the woman who had built an empire from scratch against all odds. And she was about to remind everyone exactly what that meant. "Robert," she said when he answered, her voice steady and resolved. "We need to talk. It's about the company. It's about everything." The meeting with Robert took place in the quiet sanctuary of his Central Park apartment, neutral ground away from the prying eyes and ears of Williams Innovations. When Robert opened the door and saw his mother standing there, confusion flickered across his face before giving way to warm surprise. "Mom? What are you doing here unannounced?" His smile faded as he registered the unusual tension in her posture, the gravity in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Without a word, Mary stepped forward and embraced her son tightly, drawing strength from the contact. For a brief moment, she was simply a mother again, not a business titan or an undercover janitor, just a woman who loved her child and feared for his future. Robert led her to the living room, the panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Once, that view had represented everything Mary had achieved. Now it seemed like a kingdom under siege. "Robert," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. It's going to sound incredible, perhaps even impossible, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." Robert nodded, his expression growing more concerned by the second. "Of course, Mom. What is it?" Mary took a deep breath. "For the past 3 weeks, I've been working at Williams Innovations as a janitor named Janet." Robert stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You've been what?" He leaned forward, certain he had misheard. "Mom, that's—" "I know how it sounds," Mary interrupted gently. "But please, let me explain." Over the next hour, Mary methodically recounted everything. The rumors that had first concerned her, her decision to go undercover, and the systematic abuse and humiliation she had witnessed and personally experienced. She described Gerald's cruelty, Derek's cold contempt, Veronica's violence, and Karen's betrayal of everything the HR department was meant to stand for. Robert listened in stunned silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror to shame as the full picture emerged. When Mary finally revealed the conspiracy she had uncovered, the plot to force him out and seize control of the company, his face paled. "I can't believe it," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. "These people, I trusted them. I worked with them every day. We had lunch together. I invited Gerald to my home for dinner last month. The most dangerous betrayals often come from those closest to us, Mary said softly. But Robert, this isn't just about betrayal. This is about the soul of Williams Innovations, about what kind of company it is and will be. She reached into her bag and removed a small USB drive, placing it on the coffee table between them. Everything is here: recordings, videos, documented evidence of both the conspiracy and the systematic mistreatment of employees. It's all irrefutable. Robert stared at the small device as if it might explode. What do you suggest we do? Mary's eyes hardened with resolve. We expose them, all of them, and we do it in a way that leaves no room for denial or escape. We need to call an emergency board meeting. Robert nodded slowly, determination replacing the shock on his face. You're right. We can't let them continue for another day. He reached out and took his mother's hand. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was happening. I failed you, and I failed the company. Mary squeezed his hand. We both made mistakes, Robert. I stepped away too completely, trusted too easily. But what matters now is what we do next. Together, they formulated their plan. Robert would call an emergency board meeting the following morning, citing urgent business concerns. Mary would attend, not as Mary Williams, but as Janet the janitor, maintaining her disguise until the perfect moment for revelation. It has to be dramatic, Mary explained. The board needs to see not just the evidence, but the full extent of what's happened. How completely these four have corrupted everything we built. As dawn broke over the city, mother and son stood together at the window, looking out at the skyline where the Williams Innovations logo shone prominently on their flagship building. Are you ready for this? Robert asked quietly. Mary nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. I've been ready since the moment Gerald poured water over my head. Some lessons need to be taught in ways that can never be forgotten. The next morning, the atmosphere in Williams Innovations' executive floor crackled with tension. Board members arrived earlier than usual, murmuring among themselves about the unexpected emergency meeting. Gerald, Derek, Veronica, and Karen also arrived promptly, outwardly composed, but exchanging nervous glances when they thought no one was watching. Outside the boardroom, Mary, once again disguised as Janet, quietly cleaned the hallway, her movements methodical and unobtrusive. A few board members walked past her without a second glance, her invisibility in their eyes the final confirmation of how completely the company culture had deteriorated. Just before the meeting began, Robert emerged from his office. As he passed Mary in the hallway, their eyes met briefly, a silent exchange of strength and resolve. Then Robert straightened his shoulders and walked into the boardroom with the confident stride of a man prepared for battle. Inside, the atmosphere grew hushed as Robert took his position at the head of the table. The 12 board members, respected industry veterans who had overseen Williams Innovations for years, looked expectantly toward their young CEO. Gerald, Derek, Veronica, and Karen sat together on one side, a united front of false loyalty. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Robert began, his voice steady and authoritative. I've called this meeting because I've discovered some extremely serious issues within our company. Issues that threaten not only our future, but the very foundation upon which Williams Innovations was built. Gerald leaned forward, his expression carefully concerned. I don't quite understand, Robert. We're all here, and the company is performing well. What issues are you referring to? Robert's gaze locked onto Gerald's with chilling intensity. Perhaps it's because you, Gerald, and some others here, are the source of those problems. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Gerald's face paled slightly, while Derek and Veronica exchanged quick, alarmed glances. Karen maintained her professional mask, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped her pen. I hold undeniable evidence, Robert continued, each word measured and clear, that you four have conspired together to overthrow me from my position, embezzle company funds, and secretly leak confidential information to our competitors. Gerald shot to his feet, his face flushing with indignation. Robert, you can't just accuse us like this. This is slander. We've been nothing but loyal to this company. I would never make such accusations without clear evidence, Robert replied calmly. And I believe what you're about to see will make the truth abundantly clear to everyone in this room. As the tension in the boardroom reached its peak, Gerald's gaze darted nervously around the room, finally landing on Mary, still in her janitor's uniform, visible through the glass door as she cleaned the hallway outside. You're letting these lowly people linger around during something as important as this? Gerald's voice dripped with contempt as he gestured toward Mary. Since when did a board meeting include a frail, useless janitor like her? The board members turned to look at the elderly cleaning woman, many noticing her for the first time despite having walked past her minutes earlier. Gerald stepped closer to the glass door, his frustration seeking an outlet. "Janet," he called sharply, "didn't I make myself clear? Your place is in the restrooms or some filthy corner where cleaning needs to be done, not here eavesdropping on executive meetings. Do you understand your lowly position, or has old age made you senile?" Mary remained perfectly still, her gaze unwavering as she looked directly at Gerald through the glass, not with the downcast eyes of Janet the janitor, but with a steady, penetrating stare that seemed strangely familiar to several board members. Gerald turned back to Robert, his voice sharp with irritation. "Robert, you can't let someone this useless cause chaos at an important meeting. Order her to leave right now." Robert's expression remained impassive. "I think you should be careful with your words, Gerald. There are things you'll regret if you don't stop right now." A confused frown crossed Gerald's face as he registered the strange warning in Robert's tone. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. It was then that Mary set down her cleaning supplies and walked deliberately toward the boardroom door. Without hesitation, she opened it and stepped inside, commanding the room's attention with a presence that seemed at odds with her humble uniform. Slowly, purposefully, she removed her thick glasses and then the silver wig that had concealed her true identity all this time. The boardroom fell into stunned silence as Mary Williams, not Janet the janitor, but the legendary founder of Williams Innovations, stood before them. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that for several seconds no one could speak, their minds struggling to reconcile the elderly janitor with the powerful woman now revealed. Gerald stood frozen, the blood draining from his face as he realized who he had just humiliated. Derek slumped in his chair, while Veronica's composed facade cracked completely. Karen looked as though she might be ill, her eyes wide with the recognition of her own betrayal. "Hello, everyone." Mary spoke, her voice no longer the soft, deferential tone of Janet, but the confident, authoritative voice that had closed billion-dollar deals and inspired thousands. "Perhaps some of you in this room have forgotten who I am. I am Mary Williams, the founder of this company, and I stand here today not to listen to baseless insults from those who have betrayed the trust one once placed in them, but to reveal the truth about what Williams Innovations has become." Without waiting for a response, Mary walked to the front of the room and connected her USB drive to the presentation system. The large screen behind her came to life, displaying the first of many damning pieces of evidence. "What you are about to see and hear was gathered over the past 3 weeks while I worked as a janitor in my own company," Mary explained, her voice steady and clear. "I did this because I heard troubling reports about changes in our company culture, about mistreatment of staff, about a shift away from the core values upon which I built this organization." For the next 30 minutes, the boardroom remained in stunned silence as Mary methodically presented her evidence. Video clips of Gerald's cruelty, Derek's cold contempt, Veronica's physical violence, and finally, the secret meeting where all four had explicitly detailed their conspiracy to overthrow Robert and seize control of the company. The board members' expressions shifted from shock to outrage to disgust as the full picture emerged. Several of the longer-serving members looked physically pained, as if witnessing the desecration of something sacred. When the final recording ended, Derek's cold voice sang, "Money is what matters most, not the flowery ideals about ethics that Mary and Robert have always preached." Mary turned to face the board. This is not just about four individuals abusing their power, she said quietly. This is about what Williams Innovation stands for, what it has always stood for. When I founded this company 35 years ago, I built it on three principles: equality, creativity, and respect for every single person who works here, regardless of their position. These values aren't flowery ideals. They're the foundation of our success, the reason we have thrived when others have failed. Mary turned to Gerald, who sat ashen-faced and silent. You thought Janet was nothing, just a frail old janitor whose dignity you could trample for your own amusement. But in treating her as nothing, you revealed yourself to be nothing. Nothing but a small, cruel man drunk on borrowed power. Gerald opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, the revelation too complete. Robert stood up, joining his mother at the front of the room. What we have witnessed today is not only a betrayal of personal trust, but a severe violation of the core values that have made Williams Innovation successful. Therefore, right here in front of the board of directors, I officially announce the immediate termination of Gerald Hayes, Derek Phillips, Veronica Wells, and Karen Mitchell. Gerald finally found his voice, desperation evident in his tone. Robert, you can't do this. I've dedicated so many years to this company. You can't just. Because you spent so many years in this company, Gerald. Robert cut him off sharply. Your betrayal and unethical actions are even more unforgivable. Loyalty is never an excuse to cover up abuse of power and betrayal of trust. Gerald slumped back in his chair, defeated. Derek, Veronica, and Karen exchanged panicked glances, but none dared to speak in their own defense. At a nod from Robert, two security personnel entered the boardroom, standing at attention by the door. Please escort these four out of the company immediately, Robert instructed them. Revoke all system and company device access they hold. Any documents and evidence related to their conspiracy will be handed over to the authorities for further investigation. As the four were led out under the cold, contemptuous gazes of the board members, Mary felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness that it had come to this, and a renewed determination to ensure it never happened again. When the door closed behind them, Mary addressed the silent boardroom. Today is not just the day we remove betrayers from our midst. It's the day we begin a new chapter, a chapter where Williams Innovations returns to the values I once built: respect, fairness, and dignity for all, no matter their position or role in the company. Robert nodded, continuing his mother's thought. From this day forward, our company will undergo a comprehensive cultural, managerial, and internal process overhaul. We will establish a transparent system where employees at all levels can raise issues without fear of retaliation or oppression from superiors. The board members unanimously applauded, their faces showing renewed enthusiasm and determination. The tension that had filled the room gradually gave way to a sense of relief and hope, a feeling that although something precious had been damaged, it could now begin to heal. Mary looked at her son with pride shining in her eyes. I know my son Robert is the one most deserving of leading this company into its new chapter. I have full faith in his abilities, and I trust in the potential for change and growth in everyone sitting in this room. Robert turned to his mother, his expression solemn and grateful. And I want to thank you, Mom, for sacrificing your dignity and enduring humiliation to bring the truth to light. Your courageous actions are the most valuable lesson for all of us, a reminder that true leadership isn't about power over others, but about service to something greater than ourselves. As the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, each stopping to express their respect and gratitude to Mary, mother and son remained in the now quiet boardroom, looking out at the city skyline bathed in afternoon sunlight. It's over, Mary said softly, but it's also just beginning. Robert nodded, gently taking his mother's hand. We have a lot of work to do, not just fixing systems, but healing wounds. Some of our employees have been suffering for a long time. I know, Mary replied, thinking of Maria and the other invisible workers who had endured daily indignities with no voice to protest. And we'll start with them, the people who've been treated as if they don't matter. because in truth, they matter most of all. As they stood together, the weight of the past weeks finally lifting from Mary's shoulders, she knew that the painful journey had been worth every moment. Williams Innovations would not only survive this crisis, it would emerge stronger, truer to its founding vision than ever before. And somewhere in the building, a janitor was cleaning a floor, perhaps unaware that from this day forward, their work would be seen, their voice would be heard, and their dignity would be honored. Not as an empty corporate slogan, but as a living truth at the heart of everything Williams Innovations would become. In the days that followed the dramatic board meeting, Williams Innovations underwent a transformation that felt almost miraculous. With Mary and Robert at the helm, the company began a comprehensive overhaul of its culture, governance, and internal processes rooted deeply in the values of respect, equality, and compassion. Mary didn't return to an executive role immediately. Instead, she chose to serve as a special advisor to Robert, guiding him with her extensive experience while allowing him to carve out his own leadership style. Together, they worked tirelessly to re-establish the company's core values, ensuring that every employee felt valued and heard. One of their first initiatives was to create a transparent internal reporting system, allowing employees to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. They held regular town hall meetings where employees could speak openly about their experiences and suggest improvements. Mary shared her own journey as Janet, recounting the hardships she had witnessed firsthand, and the stories resonated deeply with the staff. "Every one of you matters," she would say, her voice steady and full of conviction. "You are the backbone of this company, and your voices deserve to be heard. Together, we will rebuild this place into one where everyone feels respected and valued." As the months passed, the atmosphere at Williams Innovations shifted dramatically. Employees began to trust their leadership again, feeling empowered to contribute ideas and feedback. Productivity soared as workers became more engaged, and a culture of fear and humiliation that had once permeated the office began to dissolve. Robert emerged as a more empathetic leader, often seen walking the halls, stopping to chat with employees, and genuinely listening to their concerns. He held open-door hours, inviting anyone to come in and share their thoughts, reinforcing the message that leadership was about service, not authority. One afternoon, as Mary and Robert sat in his office reviewing new policies, Maria knocked softly before entering. The young janitor had become a regular presence at the meetings, along with other employees who had once felt invisible. They had all been encouraged to join discussions about the company's direction. "Ms. Williams, Mr. Williams," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I just wanted to thank you both. After everything that happened, I was scared to come to work. But now I feel like my voice matters. I feel seen." Mary smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You deserve to be seen, Maria. You all do. Your hard work is what keeps this company running. Never forget that." As the first anniversary of the board meeting approached, the company planned a special celebration to commemorate the changes and honor the employees who had contributed to the transformation. The event would not only serve as a reminder of how far they had come, but also as an affirmation of their renewed commitment to the values that had once defined Williams Innovations. On the day of the celebration, the entire staff gathered in the main conference hall, now adorned with banners proclaiming the company's core values. Laughter and chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had once greeted employees in the same space. Robert stood at the front, addressing the crowd with a sense of pride. "A year ago, we faced a crisis that forced us to confront the very heart of our company. Thanks to your courage and dedication, we have not only survived but thrived. We've rebuilt our foundation on respect and equality, and today, we celebrate our collective strength." As applause erupted throughout the room, Mary felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She looked out at the faces of the employees, some of whom had been so afraid just a year prior, and saw smiles, confidence, and hope reflected back at her. Later in the evening, Mary took the stage to share her thoughts. Life sometimes pushes us into the most challenging situations, but it is precisely in those moments that we truly understand the value of compassion and fairness. I hope that the lessons we've learned together will continue to guide us, ensuring that every person who walks through those doors feels valued and respected." The room erupted into applause once more, and Mary felt tears of joy fill her eyes. She knew the journey was not yet over. There would always be challenges ahead, but the foundation had been laid for a company that truly honored its employees. As the celebration continued, Mary and Robert shared quiet moments, reflecting on their journey. "We did it, Mom," Robert said, a mixture of disbelief and pride in his voice. "We really did it." Mary nodded, her heart full. "No, Robert, we did it together. And this is just the beginning. We will continue to fight for those who feel voiceless, to ensure that Williams Innovations remains a beacon of hope and respect for all." In that moment, as they stood side by side, Mary felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The company she had built from the ground up was not just a successful business. It had become a living testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and the unwavering belief that every individual deserves dignity. And so, as the sun set over the city, Mary knew that the spirit of Williams Innovations was alive and well. Together, they would continue to forge a new path, one that embraced every voice, celebrated every contribution, and upheld the values that had transformed their company into something truly extraordinary.